I was raised to hate the Lakota, the Apache warrior whispered to the Lakota woman across the dark well yard. Then you looked at me, and I forgot how. His name was Bodaway. He had not meant to say it. He had spent his whole life not saying it, holding the hatred like a coal in his chest, a hatred his own people had pressed into him before he was old enough to question it. And now, in the dark, by the settlement well, the hatred had come out of his mouth as the opposite of itself, undone by a single woman's eyes. The woman's name was Ehawee. She was Lakota, far from her northern country, one of the many displaced people who had washed up in that borderland trading settlement in the broken reservation years. She stood very still in the dark and looked at the Apache man who had just confessed two things in one breath: that he had been taught to hate her people, and that the teaching had failed the moment he saw her face. "You should hate me then," Ehawee said carefully, "if that is what you were raised to. Why are you telling me you cannot?" "Because I do not understand it myself," Bodaway said. "I have carried the hate for the Lakota since I was a boy. It is the oldest thing in me. My people gave it to me with a reason, a terrible reason, and I have never doubted it. And then 3 weeks ago you carried water past me at this well, and you looked at me, just looked, the way one tired person looks at another, and the oldest thing in me cracked like old pottery. I have been trying to glue it back together every day since. I cannot. Tonight I gave up trying. So I came to tell you the thing I am most ashamed of. I was made to hate you, and I do not. I want to know why. Hold on to that whisper by the well, because Bodaway is about to learn why, and the why is a secret buried so deep that he does not know he is carrying it. The reason he cannot hate this Lakota woman is older than the hatred itself, older than his memory, and when it surfaces, it will not only end his hate, it will tell him who he truly is. That is the whole of this story. It begins with a confession in the dark, and a buried truth waiting under it. To understand the confession, you have to understand the coal in Bodaway's chest, because a hatred that old is never about the present. It is always about a wound in the past. Bodaway had been told the story his whole life. When he was very small, his family had been killed in a raid. All of them, his mother and his father, and his sisters, leaving him the only survivor, a boy of 4 or 5, too young to remember it clearly. And the people who raised him afterward, an uncle and the band, had told him who did it. The Lakota, they said. A far-ranging Lakota war party had come down out of the north and destroyed his family and left him orphaned. That was the reason given for the coal in his chest. The Lakota took everything from you when you were too small to fight. Hate them. Hate them for your mother. Hate them for your sisters. So Bodaway hated. It was the foundation he was built on, through his whole growing up, through becoming a warrior, through the hard reservation years that scattered his people. The one fixed star in Bodaway was that the Lakota were the enemy who had murdered his family, and that he owed his dead the keeping of that hatred. The trouble was that Bodaway did not actually remember the raid. He had been too young. He remembered almost nothing of the time before his uncle's lodge. There was only one fragment, a single image that surfaced sometimes in dreams, and that he had never been able to place: a girl's face, a young girl, leaning over him in firelight, singing something soft in a tongue that was not Apache. He had always assumed it was a fever dream, or a memory of one of his own dead sisters. He had never connected it to anything. He certainly had never connected it to the Lakota he had spent his life hating. That single buried fragment was about to come up out of the deep, and it was going to change everything. Bodaway had never spoken of the fragment to anyone, not even his uncle. A warrior does not admit that a girl's face haunts his dreams. So he had carried it, the way he carried the hatred, in silence. The two of them, side by side in his chest, without his ever noticing how strange it was that he should both hate the Lakota and dream, warmly, of a girl singing in a tongue he could not name. A man can hold two things that contradict each other for a whole lifetime, so long as he never sets them down next to each other and looks. Bodaway was about to be made to look. Ehawee had come to the trading settlement the way so many came in those years, driven there by loss. Her band had been broken and relocated, and in the upheaval she had been separated from most of her family, and she had ended up in that borderland settlement working at the traders, hauling water and grinding corn, a Lakota woman, a long way from the northern plains, getting by. She had noticed Bodaway long before the night at the well. It was hard not to notice him. He was a striking man, an Apache warrior, with a stillness to him, and a sadness under the stillness, that Ehawee recognized, because she carried the same thing. But she had also noticed the way he looked at her, in the early days, which was with a coldness that bordered on hatred, and she had not understood it, because she had never spoken a word to him. What Ehawee did not know, and what Bodaway did not know either, was that she had something none of the other people in that settlement had. She had a story her father had told her, all through her childhood, a story about a small Apache boy. Ehawee's father had been a Lakota man with a large heart and a habit of doing inconvenient kind things. And the story he had told Ehawee, over and over when she was a girl, was the story of the time he had found an Apache child. Years ago, ranging far south on a long trip, her father had come upon the aftermath of a massacre, an Apache camp destroyed, not by Lakota, but by a band of renegade raiders, white and Mexican outlaws, who dealt in stolen goods and stolen lives, and who left no one to tell of it. And among the dead, her father had found one survivor, a little boy, 4 or 5 years old, hidden by his mother, and somehow missed by the killers. Ehawee's father had carried that Apache boy north with him, because he could not leave a living child in a camp of the dead. And Ehawee, then a girl of 9 or 10, had helped her family care for the orphaned boy through one winter, until the trails opened, and her father, at great risk, carried the child south again, and returned him to the nearest Apache band, his own people, where a boy belonged. Ehawee had never seen the boy again, but she had never forgotten him, because she had sung to him through that winter to quiet his nightmares. And a child you sing to in the dark stays with you. She did not yet know that the boy had a name now, and that the name was Bodaway, and that he was the warrior glaring at her across the trading settlement, with a hatred built on a lie. After the confession at the well, Bodaway and Ehawee began, carefully, to circle each other, two wary people drawn together, and each afraid of the drawing. Bodaway came back to the well. He told himself it was the only good water in the settlement, which was true, and not the reason. He began to speak to Ehawee, a few words, then more, and the coldness that had been in his face in the early days was gone, replaced by something confused and searching. He could not stop looking at her, and the more he looked, the stronger that single buried fragment pushed at him, the girl's face leaning over him in firelight, singing. He did not understand why being near this Lakota woman made an old dream stir. Ehawee, for her part, found herself drawn to the sad, still Apache warrior, despite every reason not to be. He was Apache. Her people and his were supposed to be strangers at best, and he had plainly carried some hatred for her people that she did not understand. But there was a familiarity to Bodaway that she could not explain, a feeling that she had stood near him before somewhere, long ago, which made no sense at all. They talked, over the weeks, by the well, and at the traders, and in the cool of the evenings. They traded the small pieces of their lives. Ehawee told Bodaway about the northern plains she had lost, the wide grass and the rivers, a green country so different from his red desert that he could barely picture it, the same way she could barely picture his. Bodaway told Ehawee about the reservation years that had scattered his people and ground them small, and found that her people had been ground the same way, by the same hand, and that the two of them, for all the 1,000 miles between their homelands, were carrying the identical grief. It was the grief that first made them easy with each other, before anything sweeter grew. Two people who have lost the same way, recognize it in each other, the way travelers recognize a shared road. And one evening, Bodaway told Ehawee the story of his hatred, the whole of it, the raid that killed his family when he was small, the Lakota war party his people blamed, the coal he had carried ever since. And Ehawee went very still, because something in the story did not fit, and the not fitting made her heart begin to pound. "How old were you?" Ehawee asked, very carefully, "when your family was killed? And where?" "Tell me where it happened, Bodaway." Bodaway told her. He told her the country it had happened in, the southern desert his people came from, and the season, and that he had been a small boy, 4 or 5, the only survivor, hidden by his mother, and somehow missed. And Ehawee began to shake, because it was her father's story, every detail. The southern desert, the destroyed camp, the small boy of 4 or 5, the only survivor, hidden and missed. "Bodaway," Ehawee said, and her voice was not steady. "I am going to tell you a story now, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything, because it is going to hurt, and then it is going to do something else. My father was a Lakota man. When I was a girl, he traveled far south, farther than our people ever went, and he came upon an Apache camp that had been destroyed, not by Lakota Bodaway, by renegade outlaws, white and Mexican raiders who killed everyone and took what they wanted. My father saw their trail and their leavings. He knew who had done it. It was not his people. It was not any people. It was killers who belonged to no one." Bodaway had gone rigid. Ehawee made herself keep going. "And in that camp of the dead, my father found one survivor, a little boy, 4, maybe 5 years old, hidden by his mother and missed by the killers. My father could not leave a living child among the dead, so he carried that boy north, and my family kept him through one winter. I helped care for him, Bodaway. I was 9 or 10. The boy had nightmares, terrible ones, and I sang to him in the dark to quiet them. And when the trails opened in the spring, my father carried that Apache boy back south, at great risk to himself, and returned him to the nearest Apache band, because a child belongs with his own people. We never knew his name. We never saw him again." The well yard was silent. Bodaway was staring at her, and his face had gone gray. "Sing it," Bodaway whispered. "The song. Sing what you sang to the boy." And Ehawee, with tears starting down her face, sang the soft Lakota lullaby she had sung through a long-ago winter to an orphan child she had never expected to see again. And Bodaway heard, coming up out of the deepest place in him, the firelight, and the girl's face leaning over him, and he understood, all at once, that the single buried fragment he had carried his whole life was not a fever dream, and not a dead sister. It was her. It was this woman, as a girl, singing him through his nightmares. The Lakota had not destroyed his family. The Lakota had saved his life. A man cannot have the foundation of his whole life pulled out from under him without falling, and Bodaway fell hard. Everything he was had been built on the coal in his chest, the hatred for the Lakota, the debt he believed he owed his murdered family to keep hating. And now, in one evening, by a settlement well, he had learned that the hatred was a lie. The Lakota had not killed his family. Renegades had. And the people his own band had taught him to hate for his whole life were, in truth, the people who had pulled him living from the dead and carried him home. The girl who had sung him through the dark was standing in front of him, a grown woman, and he had spent 3 weeks glaring at her with inherited hatred before the well undid it. It was too much. Bodaway turned and walked away from the well that night without another word, and Ehawee let him go, because she understood that a man given a truth that size needs to be alone with it before he can do anything else. Bodaway did not come to the well for several days. He sat alone outside the settlement and tried to put himself back together around the new shape of the truth. And it was hard, brutal work, because the hatred had not just been a feeling, it had been load-bearing. It had held up his whole sense of who he was, and what he owed the dead. Pull it out, and a great deal came down with it. There was a night in those days alone outside the settlement, when Bodaway wept, which he had not done since he was a child, and he was not ashamed of it, because he was not weeping out of weakness. He was weeping for the 30 years. For all the time he had spent hating the wrong people, all the warmth he could have carried, that he had given to a coal instead. He was weeping, too, for the Lakota man he would now never get to thank, the man who had carried a strange dying child north and asked nothing, and died never knowing the boy had lived to become a warrior. Grief and gratitude came up together, tangled, and Bodaway let them, and when they had run their course, he felt lighter than he had felt in his whole remembered life. But as the days passed, something else rose in the space where the hatred had been. Gratitude, first, vast and aching, toward the Lakota man long dead who had saved him, and toward the girl who had sung to him, and under the gratitude, growing, the thing he had felt at the well before he ever knew the truth. He had not been able to hate Ehawee, even when he believed her people were his enemy. Now that he knew the truth, that feeling had nothing left to fight it. On the 5th day, Bodaway came back to the well, and Ehawee was there, and he stood in front of her in the daylight this time, with nothing hidden. "You sang me through the worst nights of my life," Bodaway said. "I was 4 years old, and my whole world had been killed, and a Lakota girl I had never met sang to me in the dark until I could sleep. And then for 30 years, I hated your people for the very thing they saved me from. I came to this well 3 weeks ago and looked at you and felt the hate crack, and I did not know why. Now I know why. Some part of me, the oldest part, the part that was 4 years old in the firelight, recognized you. It knew you before my mind did. That is why I could not hate you, Ehawee. The boy you saved never forgot the face that leaned over him in the dark. He just did not know it was a memory and not a dream." Ehawee was crying again, openly now. "My father would have wept to see this," Ehawee said. "He carried you south at such risk, and he wondered, all his life, what became of the little Apache boy he saved. He used to say a person you save becomes a thread that ties you to a place forever, even if you never see them again. He never knew the thread tied all the way to here, to this well, to us. Then let me honor him by not wasting it," Bodaway said. "I have spent 30 years carrying the wrong thing in my chest. I am done. The coal is out. What I want to carry now, for whatever years I have, is you. Not because you saved me when I was a boy, though you did. Because of who you are now, the woman at the well, who undid a lifetime of hate, just by looking tired and kind, on the same evening I did. I was raised to hate the Lakota, Ehawee. I am asking the Lakota woman who saved my life to spend the rest of it with me. Marry me. Let the lie end in the truest thing I can build." Not everyone in that borderland settlement was glad to see an Apache warrior and a Lakota woman fall in love, because suspicion does not need a good reason, only a difference to point at. There were Apache in that settlement who knew Bodaway, and who carried the same inherited story he had carried. The Lakota are the enemy who wronged us, and they did not like to see one of their warriors take up with a northern woman. And there were others, of various peoples, who simply distrusted any pairing that crossed the lines they were used to. Talk started. Some of it was ugly. A man named Naholo, an Apache who had grown up beside Bodaway on the same hatred, took it hardest, and came to Bodaway angry. "You shame your dead," Naholo said. "Your mother, your father, your sisters, killed by the Lakota, and you would marry one. Have you forgotten who took your family from you?" And here Bodaway did the thing that only the truth lets a man do. He did not get angry. He answered, "I have not forgotten who took my family, Naholo," Bodaway said. "For 30 years I had it wrong, and so do you, because we were both told a lie by people who did not know better. The Lakota did not kill my family. Renegade outlaws did, killers who belonged to no people at all. I know this now, from the daughter of the very Lakota man who found me alive in that camp of the dead, and carried me home to our people at the risk of his own life. The Lakota did not take my family from me, Naholo. A Lakota gave me back my life. The hatred we were raised on is a lie told over a grave. I will not keep it, and if you knew what I know, neither would you. Naholo did not believe it at first. A man does not give up a 30-year hatred in one conversation, any more than Bodaway had. But Bodaway told him the whole of it. The destroyed camp, the renegades, the Lakota man who carried the boy north, the girl who sang in the dark, and Naholo, listening, could not find the seam where it might be false, because there was none. It was simply true, and the truth, once it is fully told, is very hard to keep hating across. Bodaway did a brave thing then. He did not keep the truth between himself and Ehawee and Naholo. He told it wide, to all the Apache in that settlement who carried the old story, because he understood that a lie told over a grave does not only poison one man, it poisons everyone who is handed it. He gathered them, and he told them the whole truth of his own life, the truth he had only just learned, that the raid that orphaned him, the raid their shared hatred of the Lakota was partly built on, had not been the Lakota at all, that it had been faceless renegades, and that the Lakota, far from being the enemy who wronged him, had been the people who saved his life and returned him to his own. He told them about Ehawee's father, the Lakota man with the large heart, and about the girl who sang in the dark, who now stood beside him as a grown woman. We have spent our lives hating the wrong people for the wrong reasons, Bodaway told them. I am not saying every wrong between peoples is a misunderstanding. The world is harder than that. But this one, the one I carried, was a lie, and it cost me 30 years of a coal in my chest that I could have spent on something better. I will not hand that coal to my children. The woman beside me is Lakota, and she or her father saved my life, and I am going to marry her, and our children will know the true story. All of it, instead of the lie I was raised on. You can keep the old hate if you choose, but you will have to keep it, knowing it is built on a grave and a falsehood. I could not do it anymore. I do not think, in your hearts, you can either. Some of them came around. Not all. A lie 30 years deep does not leave every mind in one evening. But enough of them heard the ring of truth in it, and saw the dead Lakota man's kindness in a new light, that the settlement's suspicion lost its teeth, and the marriage of the Apache warrior and the Lakota woman went forward with more of the people behind it than against it. Bodaway and Ehawee were married in that borderland settlement, two displaced people's child, standing up with two displaced people's daughter. And the strange and beautiful thing about their wedding was the story underneath it, which everyone there now knew. A Lakota man, long dead, had once pulled a living Apache boy out of a camp of the dead and carried him home at the risk of his own life. A Lakota girl had sung that boy through his nightmares. 30 years later, by pure chance, in a settlement at the edge of the world, that boy, grown into a warrior raised to hate the Lakota, had met that girl, grown into a woman, and the oldest part of him had recognized her before his mind could, and undone a lifetime of inherited hatred with a single look across a well yard. My father used to say, "A person you save is a thread that ties you to a place forever," Ehawee said at the wedding, where both Lakota and Apache had gathered to witness. He saved a little boy and let him go, and grieved all his life, not knowing what became of him. I wish he could see where the thread led. It led all the way here. It led to a marriage. The boy he saved is my husband now. The kindness he did, at the risk of his life, came back, a generation later, as the best thing that ever happened to me. And I will spend my life proving the thread was worth it, Bodaway said. I was raised to hate the Lakota. Then this woman looked at me, and I forgot how. Now I know it was never that I forgot. It was that the truest part of me, the part that was 4 years old and saved in the dark, had always known better than the hate. It just took 30 years, and one look across a well to remember. Bodaway and Ehawee grew old together in that borderland country, and they raised children who knew the whole true story. The destroyed camp, and the renegades, and the kind Lakota man, and the girl who sang in the dark, told straight, with no lie folded into it. Bodaway became, in his later years, a man who went out of his way to find the threads that tied distant peoples together, instead of the wounds that drove them apart. Because he had learned, harder than most, how a lie told over a grave can poison generations, and how a single truth, fully told, can undo it. He told his own story to anyone who would listen, especially to the young, especially to young men carrying inherited hatreds they had never examined. I have known men who carried such coals their whole lives, and died with them still burning. Bodaway is the only one I ever heard of who set his down, and he set it down because a Lakota woman carried water past a well and looked at him, and the boy he had been remembered her before the man he had become could stop it. The hatred that had been the foundation of his whole life turned out to be the lie, and the love that replaced it turned out to be older than the hatred, older than his memory, reaching all the way back to a firelit winter, and a little boy's nightmares, and a girl's soft song in the dark. I was raised to hate the Lakota, he had whispered by the well, in the beginning. Then you looked at me, and I forgot how. He had thought, that night, that he was confessing a weakness. He learned, in the end, that he had been confessing the deepest truth in him, the one the lie had buried but never killed. He had never really been able to hate the people who saved his life. He had only been waiting 30 years to remember that they had. If you stayed with Bodaway and Ehawee all the way to the end of this story, then you already belong here, at this fire. Another story is lit and waiting. Stay close. The frontier is wide, and the truest tales of it are far from finished.